Hey everybody, it's Riley from the Awesome Players Off-Road Motorcycle Club, and you got a quick glimpse there of player Mark on his Africa Twin 1000cc, and we are up near Chertsey, and there's a trail that runs parallel to the highway from Chertsey and then veers off into the forest and eventually takes you up to Saint-Donat. And this is part of an ATV network. You actually go through the territories of several ATV clubs. But luckily, the good folks at the Fédération Québécoise des Motos en Route, or the Quebec Federation of Off-Road Motorcyclists, have lobbied over the years and done their work, along with guys from Moto Téléaventure and guys from Ride Aventure. All kinds of folks have helped over the years, and now we have access to these ATV clubs. Not all the ATV clubs in Quebec, but several of them, and the list is growing year by year. And as you can see, this is quite a nice little place to ride. Some of you may recognize some of the trails we're going to ride today because they were featured in a few other videos. When Super Dave was first starting out, we tried to do this trail, and he got pretty whipped on the big 800, so we had to abort. And a few other times we had mechanical issues. There was a video where Chris on the HP2 had multiple flat tires. Actually, it was one flat tire that was just badly repaired multiple times. And we never made it, and finally we managed to get all the way to Saint-Donat. But today with Mark, I was pretty confident we were just going to roll. And that's why you'll notice another thing about this video. There's not a lot of handycam footage. Actually, there's no handycam footage because all that was rolling today was the GoPro. I had recently picked up this big battery pack made by a company called Wasabi. I bought this thing on Amazon, and it snapped onto the back of the GoPro 3 Plus, and it was supposed to let it roll for 4 hours or so, and I was intent on finding out. Another interesting thing about this ride is that Mark is not a believer in intercoms, or he doesn't own one, so for the first time in a long while, we'd all be living with ourselves in our own little helmets.
This is weird, man. This front brake is like...
As you just heard, I also discovered pretty quick that there was something up with my front brake. It was just super spongy. Something bizarre was going on with this bike because I hadn't touched anything to do with the brakes. And the next weekend, something would go kind of wacky with the clutch. So I guess my mechanic deserves a stern talking to. The footage is always a little more interesting if there's another motorcycle in it. So we did a little stint on the 125 highway, and then it dumped us off into the ditch here almost. So I fell in behind Mark to see what was up. And this is a section I always remember when we do this trail. It feels worse than it is. It seems if you just kind of look ahead and don't try to micromanage it, you'll get through it. Of course, I'm having a much easier time of most of this on the little 701 than Mark is on the big Africa Twin. I've known Mark for a few years, and in the years I've known him, he has owned an 1150 GS with some nice aftermarket suspension. Then he sold that, and he picked up a Super Tonnerre, which he did some pretty hardcore riding on. And a year or so ago, he picked up this Africa Twin, which he really seems to like. And he also has a little 250L Honda for the tight stuff. But Mark always seems to go for the big gun. He's got the choice, but he seems to prefer taking out the big bike. I have a strange feeling he's like a lot of guys who like to ride the big bikes. They just enjoy the semi-masochistic aspect of hustling a big bike through tough terrain. And Mark does a pretty good job of it. Here we are actually leaving the territory of one ATV club and entering the territory of a second club. But the nice thing about joining the umbrella organization is that you have access to all of them. So check out that FQMHR website if you're in Quebec and you want to get access to some ATV trails. I'm skipping pretty big chunks of the ride here because a lot of the trail looks pretty similar, but this gives you a good idea of what the ATV trails are like. I would consider this kind of a groomed ATV trail. And we don't see too many ATVs, oddly enough, on these trails, and we see even less motorcycles. Normally we have the place all to ourselves. Whenever you see the sign that looks like an ATV sitting on a triangle for some reason, that usually means the trail's about to get interesting. Once again, our good friend the GoPro is flattening all the hills for us, so it always looks like we're driving around in a parking lot. You can tell by the sound of the motor that I was going up the hill, and now I'm on the engine braking, coming down the hill. Don't really need to worry about slowing down. I could see there was lots of runoff.
Good? Excelente.
I could see Mark was shaking his hands every now and then when we stopped. So I think the AT was giving him a little more of a pounding on those rocky sections than the 701 was giving me. I spotted a little offshoot to the right and decided that it looked pretty interesting. You could see by the tire tracks that somebody had been up here. It looks like an ATV, and it looks like he was spinning his tires trying to climb. Yeah, that was pretty steep. I'm looking in my mirror. I don't see Mark right behind me. So after waiting a couple of seconds, I decided it might not be a bad idea to run back and see if he needed a hand. But he had stopped. It looks like he'd made it almost all the way to the top before he got off track. But with a little clutch abuse, he got the Africa Twin rolling again. And now he would take the lead.
So we can take this to Scenic, okay, which is 25K, and then we can turn around and come back and connect again and go to Saint Donat, or we can go straight to Saint Donat.
As you just heard, halfway up the hill, Mark had kicked it down into first, and I guess first gear was not the magic ticket because you get a little wheel hop, a little spin. Big bike's got a lot of power. You're better off trying to carry a little more speed and get up that hill in second. That's why a lot of guys will change their gearing so they can lower second gear a little bit. First gear sometimes feels a little too low, second gear is a little too high. And then the trail kind of petered out, and it was pretty obvious that this was a snowmobile trail and that the sign we just saw indicating it was 25 kilometers to St. Côme was 25 kilometers in the winter when all of this was going to be full of snow, because it didn't look very passable. And that offshoot to the right there, you just saw him go by, that was really nasty looking. So certainly not for us, so we decided to turn tail and head back to the main trail. Mark had actually taken my 701 for a test drive when we were up in Fundy for the Fundy Adventure Rally, and he'd also ridden my friend Ivan's 690. And after the ride, he'd mentioned that Ivan's bike just seemed to have a little more get up and go, which seemed odd because my bike was newer, and at least on paper it was supposed to have more power. I'd kind of been feeling it was down on power, but it had been a gradual thing, and in the back of my mind I was hoping I hadn't damaged the motor or done something silly. But when we got back from that rally, I pulled the air filter, and I'd used this kind of no-name brand air filter oil I'd picked up at a local Canadian Tire. I cleaned that crap out of there, sent away for the no-toil oil system, oiled it up, put it back in, cleaned out the air box because the old stuff kept dripping and dripping, and it was about 10 or 15 minutes into this ride that the bike just woke up. So I don't know if the ECU had to reset itself, if there was goop on some of the sensors, but now the old 701 seemed to be back to being the snarly, semi-scary beast that it was when I bought it. So I was pretty happy. A lot of sand and gravel in this neighborhood, and every now and then just on the side of the trail there would be a little mini excavation area where someone was pulling dirt out. A lot of these communities seem to depend on the ATV snowmobile crowd for a good amount of income, so they're pretty accommodating, and this is one example. There's a bridge here, and they've got this nice bridge so the ATV and motorcycle, and I imagine in the wintertime the Skidoo boys can cross. And then the trail kind of actually runs right through town here. You'll see signs in a lot of these municipalities where ATVs are actually allowed to ride right on the road in order to connect the trail network. These Can-Am Spyders are really popular here in Quebec, where they're made by Bombardier, because you do not need a motorcycle license to ride one, and getting a motorcycle license here is a year-long process that's a little bit of a pain in the butt. This part of the trail was actually paved and ran right through the front yards of a whole bunch of businesses.
That was a nice hole.
Thank you for warning me.
I just ate the front wheel. It was like, "Wah!" My stomach was like, "Wah!"
Once we got back out into the woods, the trail seemed to be a little bit more of a hard-packed sand with less rocks and little bumps, which were kind of fun to fly over. Now, the main thing limiting your speed here is how comfortable you are with a head-on collision. So in lots of spots here, when my sight line drops off, I'm rolling off. I'm also standing up on the pegs so I can see as far as I can. Over one hill, we came upon a fellow rider on a WR250.
Good day. Salut. Oui, toi?
We said goodbye to our Yamaha-mounted friend. We would see him again later in the day, and decided to take this little side trail that led apparently to a scenic overlook. Now, of course, one of the things the sign forgot to mention was that in order to see this scenic overlook, you would actually have to do some walking. And I think I speak for Mark as well as myself when I say that the reason we bought motorcycles is that we're not big fans of walking. So we got a beautiful look here at this parking area, and then had a quick chat about...
You don't want to walk, do you?
And that was it, and we were off. A little farther along, we came up behind two ATVs. And I gotta say, for ATVs carrying passengers, they were moving along at a pretty good clip. Normally when we catch up to guys on four wheels, they're just crawling along, but these guys were cooking along. I could see the guy right in front of me was lifting the inside tire on some of the corners, so he was putting in a good effort. Normally what we'll do is we'll just sit behind him. Eventually they'll spot us, and 99% of the time they'll pull over and let us by. If they're really going slow and they don't seem to notice us, we might close the gap and give the horn a little toot. But these guys were moving along pretty good, and eventually they would move over and let us go. You can see on this section that this has been pretty freshly excavated. Someone's been in here moving dirt around. And that's one thing the ATV clubs seem to be good at doing, is getting these trails punched through, getting permission from the landowners or from the municipality, and then raising the funds to get equipment in here to make these trails rideable. This next section was real nice, and I gotta say it certainly was a lot more fun to be riding the Husky now that she was running right. I mean, I'm not using 10% of this bike's potential, but still, every now and then when you get on the gas and she snarls, it's still entertaining. And this part of the country certainly is not for someone who doesn't enjoy the occasional rock. There was actually a much cleaner line over on the left, but I kind of blew it, got into the middle there, into the crappy stuff, and eventually got over onto the left again where things were smoother. I know a lot of guys when they go trail riding like to fold down their mirrors. I really like to have my mirrors popped out because I'm always looking behind me to see if my riding partner is still there. When we have the intercoms, it's not such a big deal because we're usually constantly chatting. But with Mark here, I'm taking a peek quite frequently there to make sure he's still back there. Another guy on a WR250. I guess this is a Yamaha approved trail. And that worked out all right. But I was a little concerned that Mark on the big bike might have a little tougher time than that. So the side stand was down, and it was time to go see if he needed a hand. It was pretty quiet, so I had a feeling there was trouble. Mark had fallen apparently, but had got the bike upright before I managed to get to him. Once again, that actually is a hill, and a steep one at that. I was following Mark now, and lo and behold, who was in front of us? The mysterious man on the WR. He was clipping along pretty good, but Mark seemed intent on going just a little bit faster than he was. So around him we went. We eventually did make it to Saint-Donat, and after doing a quick U-turn, I decided to take Mark down a little side road I knew that would take us to a trail that led to a very nice hydro line that we had done many times way back in the day. This road used to be super rough, but I think they tore down the old hotel and they built some sort of highfalutin lodge at the end of it, so this road was brand new pavement. And the only thing spoiling our fun was that every corner just seemed to have an incredible amount of loose gravel on it. But this is one of the perks of having a dual sport with a license plate on it. You can still hit a nice twisty stretch of asphalt like this and have some fun. This is a trail I first did in, I think, 1999. I really only started riding off-road in 2010, but in 1999-2000, my buddy Joe and I each bought a KLR, and we went off-road riding about 3 or 4 times. And one of the events we did used this trail. So we did this when we were super green on totally stock KLRs, and it went about as well as you could expect. Here we're skirting along the right-hand side of this nice Laurentian lake, and I gotta say, the trail doesn't look like it's been getting a lot of use, and because they've built up this fancy little restaurant resort not too far at the other end of the lake, I have a bad feeling that the days of this trail are probably numbered. There's something to be said for when you're riding in a hydro line in the big wide open spaces and you can see for kilometers, but there's also something to be said for these nice tight trails where the branches are kind of overhanging the trail and you're ducking down to avoid getting slapped in the face. Just feels a little more intimate or something. And this one here was not looking actually too overgrown for some reason. This section here was bare earth. The earlier section seemed to have a little more grass growing on it. I knew there was some stuff coming up ahead that I wanted to tell Mark about, but we didn't have intercoms. You get spoiled when you're used to having an intercom system, so I did it old school. Pulled over, waited for Mark to catch up.
If I'm not mistaken, there's 2 hill climbs. This one and one more.
I wasn't quite sure how rough this climb was going to be, so I decided to hang back and make sure Mark made it all the way up, so that if he didn't, I wasn't going to be right on his tail light trying to get around him. But it didn't look too rough, and Mark cleared the first one without any issues. Then there was a momentary flat spot, and then another climb. And these climbs actually weren't that rough. I guess I just have those old memories of trying to do this on my KLR with no idea what I was doing.
Now, if you go right, it takes you down to that trail that said no motorized vehicles. But the downhill at one point, I only did it once. I'm not doing it again. And then if you go this way, it's just see the nice hydro line stuff? It's nice. Alrighty.
Hydro lines can be the bread and butter for a Quebec off-road rider simply because tons of areas are just solid forest. And even if hydro doesn't necessarily maintain these trails or roads, they at least keep the brush under control. So there's a good chance if there's going to be a trail, it's going to be on a hydro line. The problem with the hydro lines in this area is, once the road has been put in, if nobody maintains it, then on all the hills, erosion washes away all the dirt and just leaves behind all the rocks. Although so far this section was looking pretty sweet, and way off in the distance I could see that this trail was going to go on and on. We'd done this a couple of times a few years ago, and if I remember correctly, at some point the trail turned into kind of a grassy two-track that eventually dead-ended at a clearing where some hunters had a tree stand. But before that, there was a turn to the left that you could actually access some other trails and roads, so you didn't have to double back.
Yes.
So here we've changed the lead. Mark's in front. I did know that somewhere along this trail there was at least 2 gnarly hill climbs and 1 gnarly descent. And in years past, we had to do some douche roping to get up some of the hills, and in other years we'd made it.
Oh, that's rocky, boys.
And there in the distance was the first one, and it was looking particularly lumpy today. Mark just went for it. And then he just got bounced around. It's hard to see because we're in such a wide shot here, but he just got bounced around, and at one point he veered off to the left, and he wasn't going anywhere. And instead of just digging a hole, he was smart enough to decide to turn around and take another shot at it, because this is not the kind of hill where on a big bike you're halfway up, you're going to get going again.
Try that again.
This would be take 2. And I was looking at this hill, and I gotta say, even being on the smaller bike, I was not very optimistic of my chances of making it up this hill. So Mark was showing a lot of grit, I think, to take another shot at this. Normally on something like this, you can kind of see some spot where it looks better, where there's less rocks, but this was just edge-to-edge rocks. So Mark made it a little bit farther up, but I was getting a bad feeling. Of course, the douche rope is always there, but one issue today is there was only 2 of us, so with one guy manhandling the bike, you'd only have one guy pulling on the douche rope, and when we had done this in past years, we had 3 or 4 guys.
That is a mean hill.
So, you know, when you got 3 guys pulling on a douche rope, you can pretty much drag a bike up this hill in gear.
Yeah, no. It's too bad, because I think it's okay. From what I remember, this was it.
There was another bad hill climb. We weren't sure if we'd be able to make that one, so we had a little discussion about how much energy
That's gonna be a big
we
effort
wanted
for
to
you guys.
spend getting up this hill, because with
And
only the
4
2
guys
of
to
us,
douche it up there.
this was going to be a major endeavor.
Man, it's really eroding.
And after a little chat, we decided to
Well,
just head back and
find us
retrace our
a little
steps.
lake there. That's the big lake.
Looking back on it, that was probably a really good decision, as it was getting a little later in the day now. We hadn't had lunch because our favorite lunch spot in Saint-Donat had been closed. So we had each scarfed down some quality Costco products, and we were now heading back down the hill. On the way out, we came across a couple who seemed to be heading into the woods to go for a picnic lunch. So we slowed right down, tried to smile, tried to wave, and of course, I always wonder what the perception of those people is. When we go by, do they say, "Oh, look at that, some nice fellows on some relatively quiet motorcycles"? Or do they go, "Oh my God, monsters tearing up nature, scaring the wildlife. I must write a letter to the mayor"? On the return trip, I missed a turn somehow because we were following the same trail, and we ended up doing a really nice section of this twisty 2-lane blacktop. And certainly on the pavement, it was nice to have the 701 back to full power. When I bought this bike, I was pretty concerned about how it was going to be on the highway. I was coming from an F800 GS, which effortlessly cruised the highway. But I've got to say, the 701 at highway speeds is just kind of loafing along. You can honestly be going 110, 120 kilometers an hour, and if you whack the throttle open, it gets up and goes. So when you're cruising down a road like this, with an 80 or 90 kilometer an hour speed limit, the Husky's not even really breaking a sweat. Once we got back on the trail, I ended up following Mark for most of the way back to the start. And Mark was feeling pretty good, I think, because he was hustling the Africa Twin down these sections at a pretty good clip. So let me once again apologize for the lack of variety in the shots. This was just one of those days where all we did was ride. There wasn't a lot of standing around chatting. There wasn't a lot of stage shots where someone ran ahead and set up the camera. We got on the bikes, we rode, we turned around and we rode back. So if you have any questions about the bikes, the gears, anything at all, don't be shy. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit the like button, and also be sure to subscribe. And now there's some new stuff on YouTube. There's a little alarm icon down on the right there. Click on that and you'll get a notification whenever one of our new videos comes out. You can also head over to awesomeplayers.com. Not much going on over there except that you can find an email address where you can contact us if you prefer email, as well as the Awesome Players little merchandise store, where all we're actually selling at the moment is some stickers. But you can click on the order tab and pick up some stickers if you'd like. And of course you can head over to Facebook, and on Facebook you can reach us there as well, or share with us a picture, a story, anything you'd like. So once again, I hope you enjoyed another small adventure of the Awesome Players Off-Road Motorcycle Club. Thanks for watching.